Okay, everybody, welcome to Zoom Tuesday at the Capitol with the Minnesota Brain Injury Alliance. We gather every Tuesday, our citizen advocates, and provide updates and information and conversation about what's happening at the Minnesota State Capitol and ways that we can make sure to protect the funding for services and supports for people with brain injury, and also other relevant legislation to improve people's lives. This is week 9 of the legislative process, and I think I'm going to keep talking about this on a week by week basis. If you guys can believe it, we're already 9 weeks into the process here. And what I want to focus on today for the update is the budget forecast. Many of you have probably seen the news last Friday when the budget forecast came out. Let me give you just a quick refresher on what the budget forecast is, and then talk briefly about what's in that budget forecast, and then finally talk just briefly about what that means moving forward. And I'll try not to get too wonky here, but the budget forecast is a really important part of the budget setting process. It's the official checkbook, the official document, the official balance sheet for the state of Minnesota. And so every twice a year, every November and every February, the state updates its forecast. And basically, it's an economic projection. It says basically, here's how much we have in the bank. Here's how much we think's coming in. Here's how much we think's going out. And that is basically a bunch of economists and really smart people sit down and they dive into the weeds, ins and outs of the economy, what's happening, what's the job outlook. I mean, you can read many pages of economic analysis if you're so moved. I can show you how to do that. Um, the reason that that's important is because the state has to have a balanced budget. And so when the state legislature sets its budget, and as you guys remember, the state sets its budget every 2 years. It's a 2-year budget. And that budget this year will start, the next 2-year budget will start on July 1st of 2021. So just in, what is that, about 4 months, the budget will start. And that'll go for the next 2 years. And that budget must be balanced against the forecast that just came out. So it's a very important part of the process, and it's the best guess, the best estimate on where things are going, and it tells the legislature exactly how much money they have that they can spend, and how much is coming in. Okay, so that's what it is. So the forecast that came out Friday was actually incredible news. If you might remember from once COVID hit, and that, can you guys believe it's been a year? A lot of the projections and the economic impact of COVID had really driven the economy down, and there was an awful lot of horror stories I mean, I'm not saying these aren't real negative impacts. I'm just saying that there was a lot of concern that the state programs were going to be in serious jeopardy. And in fact, the most recent the most recent budget projection we had prior to last Friday was that the state was going to be facing a $1.3 billion deficit. Um, Now, the budget forecast that came out Friday, instead of a $1.3 billion deficit, it says we're going to have a $1.6 billion surplus. Okay. So from a negative $1.3 billion to a positive $1.6 billion, for those math wizards out there, is a swing of nearly $3 billion. Okay. I guess it's 2.9 if you're keeping track. But that's a healthy swing. And so a lot of people are kind of like saying, well, how did that happen? Why did that happen? What does it mean? And so again, I'm not going to dive into the whole details of it, but I do want to tell you, sort of what underlies that math. Okay. So again, it gets much more complicated than this, but it's not that much different than your guys' checkbooks. Okay. You got three basic things to consider when you're looking at your checkbook. Number one, how much is in it right now, right? How much money you got in the darn thing, right? I mean, that's a pretty important concept, right? How much money you got in your checking account. Number two, over the course of the next year, 2 years, month, whatever time frame you're looking at, how much is going to be coming in, right? Am I working? Am I getting Social Security, disability insurance, whatever income? How much money is coming into that checking account? And number three, how much is going out? So how much do I got? How much is going to come in the future? How much is going to go out in the future? That's all the state budget is when you boil all this stuff down. Okay. And so there were three things that made up that nearly $3 billion swing. Okay. or 2.9. We'll just call it 3. Okay, number one, the balance. Okay, how much is going to the state's checkbook July 1st when this budget start? That swung to the good of an additional $546 million. And so the state checkbook is much fuller, is expected to be much fuller when the budget starts than it was when they initially set this up, projected it. There's a pretty straightforward reason for that, and it's primarily because of the federal stimulus money that came in for the most recent COVID. Well, that explains a lot of different things, but part of it is that, and so that's number one. So there's more in there. In terms of the money coming in, because of that federal stimulus and because of changes in the economic outlook, the state is expecting 1.4 billion more dollars to come in. Okay, so this another way of looking at that is the state got a big raise, so there's a bunch of money coming in. I'll talk about briefly about where that money's coming from in a second. And the final point is in terms of the amount of money going out, spending has been reduced in this forecast by about $455 billion. So if you add up the amount of money, that more money that's in there than we thought, more money that's coming in than we thought, and less money going out than we thought, that's how you get a $3 billion swing. Now, there's lots of politics and lots of things that and assumptions and things that go into that, but that's where that came from. So that I think is really good news. So let me tell you just briefly where the money that's coming in from. Remember, I said they think there's another one. There's 1.4 billion more dollars coming in. So they are projecting that the individual income tax will bring in additional funds. They're projecting the general sales tax will bring in additional funds, and the corporate franchise tax will bring in additional funds. And so roughly that's an economic analysis that says more people are working, more people will be paying income taxes, more people will be working, more people will be buying stuff. So that will bring in more sales taxes, and more corporations will get back into business and their businesses will grow, and that'll bring in more corporate sales taxes. And so remember that this growth is projections on the sort of more doomsday scenarios from earlier this year, from the middle of last year. So that's where the state projections of a $1.4 billion increase in additional revenue comes from. In terms of the money that the state is saving, the changes are primarily in two areas: health and human services and education. And so it's anticipated that there will be 250 million less dollars spent in health and human services, and 165 million less dollars spent in education. And remember, this is not a cut. This is how much they thought the programs were going to cost. And so the programs are costing less. They're costing the state less. And again, a lot of this can be traced back to federal stimulus of the economy, federal funds coming to the state for COVID relief. I'm not entirely sure what's behind the reduction in K-12 education, but that's okay. So that's probably wonky enough, right? You got three things. You got how much money is in the account. That's improved. You got how much money is coming in. That's really improved. And you got how much money are you spending. That's gone down. And so that's where we see this swing. And so remember, we're talking about a total revenue. These numbers get mind-boggling, and maybe they don't mean anything, you guys. But we're talking about total revenues for fiscal year 2021 for the 2-year budget of $47 billion. Okay, so that's a pretty big chunk of money coming in. And we have spending going out of of about the same amount. So, okay, enough economics. I don't know if that was interesting or boring, but that's where we're sitting. So, what does that mean? And I have to tell you that answering that question and what that means is a political question, because everybody's going to have a different opinion on exactly what that means. I think it's pretty safe to say, and I don't think it's too political to say, it means one thing that it means is we're not going to have a budget. I keep using the word fight. I take it for what it's worth. Battle, competing interests. It's not going to be dominated by huge cuts. They're going to have to be made because we have a deficit. So I think that is really good news. Okay. Because if we were looking at a $1.6 billion deficit, then that money has to be cut somewhere. You guys have all participated in uh, different trainings that we've had that show how big of a portion of that budget goes to health and human services. So any cut really has a tremendous impact on health and services, human services, because that's such a big part of our budget. So that's not going to happen. Um, but just a couple other factors, and then I'll wrap this up. Number one is so everybody sees this surplus of $1.6 billion and thinks, oh, thank God, there's all this money. Now I can get my program funded. Well, guys, add it up. The math doesn't work. There is way, way, way more good ideas on what to do with $1.6 billion than there is money to pay for those things, and that's true for us too. This gets wonky, but the budget forecast doesn't include inflation. So there's always, you got to worry about, well, even if you have to give more money just to pay for things that cost more than they did last time. Don't ask, you can ask me why, but that's a totally different conversation about why we don't include inflation. It was a political thing. But at any rate, it's $1.6 billion is there's no way that's going to pay for what everybody wants to do. And the other thing is that you know no matter what we're talking about, the Democrats and Republicans will find a way to fight, right? They'll find a way to argue about it. And so it doesn't matter if there's a surplus, if there's a deficit. If you're a Republican, it's the worst time to raise taxes. It doesn't matter if there's a surplus or a deficit. COVID, if you're a Democrat, COVID has had an unequal impact on people. And some people are hurting more than others, and they need to be supported, and we need to invest in the economy and get things going. And so we'll see a pretty big fight between the Republicans in the Senate who run the Senate, the Democrats who run the House, and the governor, who's a Democrat, over what to do with this funding. And I know you guys a couple of you have already sent me emails that you've gotten from your legislators talking about what they think this means. So at any rate, I'm not going to exhaust every political argument that's happened, but it's good news that there's a budget surplus instead of a deficit. I don't know how we can say that's not good news. That's great news, but it doesn't really change the fact that the funding is scarce, that there's greater needs than there is money, and that we have a political fight ahead of us about whether or not this surplus should be, we should cut taxes and give the money back to business, or whether we should invest in education or we should invest in healthcare. And those are conversations and fights that are going to be happening as we move forward. So this is getting a little long, but let me just say the three next things that are happening. Number one, the governor will update his budget forecast or budget proposal, excuse me, after the forecast. So he will do a supplemental budget. Number two, both the House and the Senate, so the political bodies, will start to set their targets. And they'll start with setting overall targets. How much should we do with taxes? Should we reduce taxes? Should we raise taxes? And what should we do with spending? From a math point of view, reducing taxes is the same thing as spending, right? If you're gonna give somebody a tax cut, it's the same thing as giving somebody, putting money into a program. It's money that the state has that it's given to something else. And finally, we'll see a lot of them building a lot of these committees building their omnibus budget bills over the next few weeks. We got deadlines coming up, a lot of other things I could talk about, but I wanted to spend time today on the budget forecast and understanding the importance of these numbers. So I hope that wasn't too boring. I hope that wasn't too long. I hope you have lots of questions, and I'm going to stop there and see where it goes. So